Dive in. Fear. Fear is one of the primary obstacles to neighboring well. I mean, in fact, fear is just an obstacle. It can be an obstacle in life. And I think, as I heard one of my heroes say one time, I think one of the greatest fears is the fear that if I really open myself up to you, if I really let you in and you really get to know me, then you might not like me. You might not want to be my friend. You might not want to be my neighbor. So I'm just going to put up a little bit of a mask. I'm going to put my shield up because that fear keeps me from opening myself up. And maybe some of you can relate. But it's not just our fear of our neighbors. We all probably have a neighbor that's maybe more afraid of us than we are of them. Can you think of maybe that neighbor and you're like, man, I don't, for some reason, there's something about me that they'd say they just avoid me. In fact, there's this one guy in our neighborhood. We know him as the man with pink shorts because he walks around, if it's like above 50, he's walking around with his shirt off in these super pink shorts, and he's married. His wife actually came over and hung out with us on Oktoberfest. Do you remember that? Anyway, Jeff remembers. But anyway, he's out and he just walks the neighborhood. And I've been running lately, as I've been talking about it. And I see him almost every time I'm out. And I am as friendly as I can be. I'm like, hey, man, how you doing? And I mean, he just does not wave. He doesn't look or acknowledge me. But I'm determined, man. I'm going to love this neighbor. I don't know if he's afraid of me or just thinks I'm a weirdo. I don't know. But part of the problem is our nonstop full access to the news cycle. And actually in the book, I think they go into that pretty well. But we had this right on our phones. All the bad news that you could ever want at your fingertips. One of the side effects is that it can cause us to be suspicious and fearful of people who look like those people in the news, right? Whatever it is, whatever that bad news situation is. People that we don't know. We get suspicious and fearful of people we don't know. Others become suspicious and fearful of us too. And we hear about those sick people. Those crazy sick people or whatever that might mean to you, they're out there, and then we think they're everywhere, they're all around us, and they might even be living next door. And because of that, we get afraid to live on mission and really love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Now, this is not to minimize the real dangers and threats that are out there. And I mean, if you listen to the news, if you're on Nextdoor, you constantly see either the potential or perceived reality of some of those real threats. And I don't want to minimize those in any ways. It's always been out there. I don't know, has it always been the same as today? I don't know. I think there are definitely some mental issues. There's things that people are dealing with today because of the stresses of modern day living, industrialization, all that kind of stuff. But people have been crazy. In fact, and I'm going to talk about this on Mother's Day, we're going to talk about pain and mothering on Mother's Day, and a totally different kind of message than I've ever done. And it has affected a lot of people in our church. And I've just been having some conversations, actually with Jordan. Ruth and I were talking about that this morning, and she's been helping me to minister to a couple that I officiated a wedding for last year, that they're having some pain, they're having some trouble. And I just felt like, man, this is something that I've never preached on, I've never really dealt with myself. But we've had a number of people in our congregation struggle with infertility and struggle with all kinds of issues. There can be a lot of pain. Imagine, losing a child. Our family dealt with that a few years ago. Anyway, that's a second message, and that message is for Mother's Day, and so we'll talk about that. If you know someone, if you know a woman or a person who's dealt with pain and mothering, we'll talk about a similar thing on Father's Day. I want you to invite them, and hopefully we'll have a gospel answer and encouraging. That doesn't make it all better. That doesn't take the pain away, but we're going to address some of that pain from God's perspective. But we go all the way back to the very first family. And again, I'll talk about this a little more on Mother's Day. Can you imagine Eve's broken heart? That her sons ended a debate in murder? So I bring that up because this is not new. Pain is not new. Troubled news is not new. I don't know if... did Adam and Eve have a last name? I don't know. But I don't know who their neighbors may have been. I'm sure they were all family members. But just imagine, the word got out about Cain pretty fast. And some people probably wanted to avoid him. And maybe what he just needed was a little bit more love. I don't know. But the point being, there's bad news out there, and that can cause us to be suspicious and more fearful about the people that are around us than we should. What heightens suspicion is a lack of relationship. It's true, right? It's true in all relational circles. Closeness grows trust and intimacy. When you're close to someone, when you have an ongoing conversation, when you're talking, when someone's open about when someone's vulnerable, right? When someone shares vulnerably with you, that opens it up. Actually, Elliot and I were we weren't really joking about this, but we were talking about the last couple Sundays, we've had a little bit of a time of confession before service. And I think, how healthy is that, man? If you got something that you're struggling with, this is a great time to just, hey guys, I'm struggling with this area. And then that draws people in. It draws people in when someone talks about maybe a struggle vulnerably. But the opposite is true, right? Distance breeds distrust and suspicion. See, Elliot and I, we meet regularly. We have dinner every other week before men's group, kind of as a staff kind of thing. And when we're doing that, man, things are great. But if I don't see Elliot for a month, and then he sends me a text that I take out of context, and I'm like, man, what is going on? What is going on? Elliot has gone off the deep end. I think he's lost his faith, man. Is he even still married? I mean, he's gone, like all kinds of suspicion, And he's like, oh, no, man, everything's good. I just haven't seen you in a while. And you probably experienced that. It's one thing to volunteer for an outreach event downtown once a year. I know some people have talked about doing that on Christmas or Easter, or not Easter, Thanksgiving or during the holidays or something like that, and that's great. Or even more locally, volunteering here in Montgomery County is a fabulous thing. But neighboring can often be much scarier because our neighbors are always there. Or at least, you understand what I'm saying, right? If we develop more of a relationship, that will take time. If I start really neighboring, if I get committed to this neighboring thing, it's gonna be costly. It's a long-term kind of commitment. I mean, almost all of our neighbors that live on our townhouse row, and many of you have been over to our house, I can't remember the last person that's even moved in. I mean, it's been years. We've lived there for like 11 or 12 years. The majority of them have been there for most of that time. I mean, you're kind of stuck. We did an open house, a few years ago, and I never thought about, wow, people might want to continue to come over. They're always there. The fear factor is real. What if they start knocking on our door? What if they start asking for things? Oh, it's just a little easier to just wave from a distance. What fear can do, though, is lead to the place where God wants us to be, which is to be more dependent on Him. So the question that I've been asking you to wrestle with God with is simply this: God, what would you have me to do in regard to my neighbors? God, what would you have me to do in regard to my neighbors? When we're afraid, when we're uncertain, a little bit of stress in our life is good. We have to have a little bit of stress that pushes us to action. And in this case, it's pushing us to dependence on God in how we love our neighbors. There are two stories from the Bible that can help us overcome this fear. The first one I'm just going to describe is from Numbers 13. Most of us are probably familiar with this. It's the story of the Israelites after being freed from slavery, and they're about to enter the land that God promised them. It was supposed to be this land flowing with milk and honey. Now, I don't know exactly what that meant. I mean, I was in Israel studying in 2007. Nothing about that country looks like it's flowing with milk and honey today. So we're just going to assume that 3,500 years ago, it looked a little bit different. Man, what a far cry from their experience as slaves. God promising to have this amazing new land. But God, what about the neighbors? They are problematic. Now, to summarize what happened, the people chose 12 men to go into that land, 12 spies, if you will, to go into the land, check it out, and then report back, and we're going to make preparations to move in to the neighborhood. 10 of the 12 came back absolutely gripped with fear. Todd and I were talking earlier. They probably had some mental health issue related to, that day because they were crazy. I mean, it was kind of a made-up fear. They said that the land was amazing just as God had promised, but the neighbors were like giants who saw them only as mere grasshoppers. Only 2 of the 12 were positive and saw things differently, Joshua and Caleb. They could see, Joshua and Caleb could see that fear was gripping these other 10, but their report was just perception and not reality. They had nothing to fear. And that is often our problem too. In the book of The Art of Neighboring, the authors add that, quote, fear changes not only our image of others, but also what we assume they think of us. I mean, what do your neighbors really think about you? And how do you know what they think about you? The only way to really know that is to be close enough to know what they would say about you. The assumption of the Israelites cost an entire generation the opportunity to enter the promised land. The entire generation died except for 2, Joshua and Caleb, who led the next generation into the land. And they discovered the others' perception was way off, way off. Way off. Those giants were actually the ones who feared the Israelites after hearing what God had done to miraculously bring them out of the country of Egypt. And imagine the stories that went on of the Pharaoh and all the chariots that were drowned. And I mean, it was a disaster for Egypt. And how God miraculously brought them through the water, one miracle after another. And that reputation had gone forth. And so fear really has a way of distorting our perspective of our neighbors, doesn't it? And certainly the Israelites had an absolute twisted perception of what the people in the land thought about them. Rahab's testimony really shares that. So if you read the book of Numbers, it's pretty fantastic. Now the second story involves Jesus, and we're going to read this. Jesus gives us a snapshot of his mission and the mission that he has called us to in regard to neighboring. So check out this story. This is in Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 27. Now we need to pick up the text, and Luke helps us by adding after this. And so just hold on to that, ... After what? Well, in Luke 5, we catch a glimpse into the heart of God in Jesus for people. All kinds of people. See, God so loved the world that he sent his son not only for you and me, but for all of your neighbors. And all of their families, and all of their friends, and all their coworkers, and all of the people that come from the places where your neighbors come from. I don't know about where you live, but in my neighborhood, my direct neighbors are from Vietnam and Russia and Ethiopia and, all over. And even foreign lands like PG County and Frederick, Damascus, Poolsville. Just think about different places around where we live within an hour and how different it is. And God so loved all those places in all the world that he sent his one and only son, that whosoever would believe would not perish but have everlasting life, so that everyone would have a chance to be restored. Luke painted a picture of Jesus bestowing his messianic grace on a wide variety of people in this short story. Just prior, in chapter 4 and here in chapter 5, Jesus had cast out demons. He had cleansed and healed a leper. He healed a man who was paralyzed his entire life. We get a picture here, just in the short part of Scripture, of the diversity of people and neighbors that God loves and calls to himself. All kinds of people. The kind of people that we should also love and care about. So after he had done all this is at the very beginning of his ministry. In Luke chapter 5, it's the beginning of where the disciples are fishing. And it's in the morning, and Jesus comes out, and he's like, "Hey, guys, cast out over into the deep." And Peter's like, "Rabbi, we've been fishing all night. We've caught nothing." And he's like, No, trust me." And Peter's like, remember Peter's response? Peter's like, "Oh, Lord." He gives the excuse, "We fished all night, we didn't catch anything, but at your word, we'll do it." And so he does that, and man, they get a haul. They're freaking out like the boat's about to sink. They catch so many fish because Jesus told them where to go. And then shortly after that, there's these stories of Jesus giving his messianic business card. Yeah, I'm the Messiah, healing. I'm the Messiah, healing. I'm the Messiah, feeding 5,000 people, and he's doing these miracles, demonstrating that he's the real one. And then Jesus went out and saw a tax collector. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like talking to tax collectors. In fact, I found out I'm deeply burdened, and don't worry about me when I say this, but it looks like we made a mistake in our taxes in 2019. And I've been on the phone with people. Thankfully, I have this audit protection and everything. I've been on the phone with these audit. And basically, we had this debt that was forgiven that apparently was taxable. And we're going through this whole thing. And it's a mess. And any of you just dying to follow up with an IRS person? Well, we would hope, I don't mean to be political or divisive in any way here, but we would hope that our system here of tax collecting would at least be somewhat honest. Okay. Not the case back then. Not the case. So Jesus went out, he saw a tax collector by the name of Levi, it's Matthew, sitting at his tax booth. So he's doing his job. He's just doing his dirty job right there, right? Not well-liked kind of person, not a person or a career that had a great reputation. And Jesus simply says, "Follow me," Jesus said to him. Verse 28, and Levi got up. He left everything and followed him. So, Levi, Matthew, wasn't the chief tax collector, but we had the story of the chief tax collector. Do you remember his name? Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. He was definitely wealthy. Matthew, not so much. He wasn't the chief tax collector, but he probably skimmed enough off. He probably lived pretty well, fairly well off. He was likely despised by the most part for being part of such a corrupt vocation. Levi's abrupt and immediate response shows the authority of Jesus and the right response any of us should have had. Follow me. Okay, Lord. And you remember several times in scriptures, but wait, Lord, but I got to go. And he gives these radical examples. One is I have to bury my father. Can you imagine? I hope I never have to personally be in that situation where, a parent passes away and the Lord's like, no. I mean, there's a context for that too. Jesus says, follow me. Here, Levi gets up, leaves his career, leaves his retirement, leaves his security, leaves it all to follow Jesus. He got up right away. It was costly. Then, verse 29, he immediately follows Jesus and throws a party and invites all his sinful friends to meet Jesus. Then Levi held a great banquet. It wasn't a banquet. It was a great banquet. It wasn't just a Boker Tov. It was a Layla Tov. I mean, it was a big deal. It was an awesome party for Jesus at his house. He held a great banquet for Jesus. And a large crowd of sinners showed up, tax collectors. Man, they show up. They're eating. Bless, our bless rhythm. Begin with prayer. Listen. Eat with. Eating with your neighbors, not a difficult thing. They probably have to eat on most days. You probably have to eat on most days. Killed two birds with one stone. Just don't do what I've done to my very deeply committed Islamic neighbors and invite them over during Ramadan. Be aware. It took me a little while to figure that one off. What's been really interesting, they're very committed, is their participation in Ramadan, especially with Muhammad the dad, has opened up some great conversation about prayer because they're very devoted to prayer, especially during Ramadan. It's been a really cool thing. All right, so the tax collectors and others, they're eating with them. Verse 30. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to the disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" This gave Jesus a pretty bad reputation. He was known to be a friend of sinners, so much so that he was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton. Man, the joy of Levi, though, the joy of Levi and his outcast guests is such a contrast with the negative attitude of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. The religious leaders scorned the fact that Jesus and his disciples ate and drank with sinners. Just think about the risk of ceremonial defilement. They were risking a lot to be around this Messiah. The word probably got out about all these miracles. Remember, the context of this story is just after he did these miracles. And so, I mean, there had to be some tension. There had to be some turmoil between, gosh, it sure looks like that leper was truly healed. It sure looks like that guy who was born paralyzed and now is leaping for joy. There's something to that. And man, this meal that Jesus served up with these 5 loaves and 2 fish, it's hard to argue. We saw it. But if I'm around them, that's going to cost me. It's going to cost me. I might be unclean. Jesus was never worried about that. And in fact, he wasn't worried about the outward. He wasn't worried about being outwardly unclean. He was worried about what was going on from the inside out. And he still is, of course. They should have been focused on Jesus and his word rather than criticizing the people that Jesus was befriending. And I see this on social media all the time. There's people I can just think of immediately. I mean, just a number of so-called Christian leaders, and it's like all they do, I don't know how they get the time to do this, but they're just fishing to criticize other Christian leaders or something. I mean, I'm too busy for that. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek. I see some of it too, and I'm tempted to, quote tweet something, oh, I can't believe this or whatever, but man, if the gospel's going out, I was even thinking this morning as I was driving in, I was thinking about a church in our community who Laura and I visited when we were in between. So we had left the church that I was pastoring before, and we hadn't yet started Sunday morning services. And so we had about a year where we got to visit a lot of churches. It was awesome. Pastors don't normally get to do that. So we visited a number of churches in our community and others that are a little further out. And one that we went to, we did not have a favorable experience. It's a little bit of a larger church. And I have felt like they are trying to be more like the world in an attempt to attract people. And I've always been, you've heard me say this before, whatever attracts people to church is usually what you have to do to keep people in church. So if your model is simple, if you preach the word, if you try to just be a family on mission, empower people to meet in groups and bless the neighborhood genuinely, we don't really do anything fancy. A lot of people aren't looking for that. Kids in the room, oh, that's annoying, That's uncomfortable. I'm coming to get fed. I can't be distracted with by the way, Eduardo and I have talked about, we're working on, that, so that we don't want to take that totally for granted. But, I understand this isn't going to be the church for everybody. I hope it'll be a church that more and more people will feel comfortable being a family on mission. But we're not going to have, smoke machines would be cool, and, some other things would be cool and things like that. But when you got to play godless music to attract people to want to smile and have fun at the beginning of your church service, I don't get that. But I'm not going to tell you what church it is. God bless. They're preaching the gospel. People are getting saved. They're doing awesome things, man. For the most part, I love what they're doing. I'm friends with, the pastor, their worship leader. We're cordial and bless each other. Man, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they should have been focusing on the word of God to them. I'm preaching to myself first. Ed, focus on what God is saying to you. Let's focus on what God is saying to us. Don't worry about. God bless. If that church is, the people are, more people are going to church, that's a good thing, right? Even if they go just to see the juggling poodles on fire. I don't know, whatever attracts them to go. It's better that they're there at least to hear the word of God. Jesus' answer is key and important for us as we consider the kind of neighbor we are and the kind of neighbors we love. Verse 31, Jesus answered them. This is great. It is not the healthy who need a doctor. Really, isn't that deep? Like, boy, you really got to be the Messiah. You have to be all-knowing to say that, right? It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Wow, thanks, Jesus. That's revelatory. Verse 32, I have not come to call the righteous. Who is righteous? But sinners to repentance. He was being ridiculed for spending time with sinners, and Jesus is like, dude, y'all have it wrong. Like, the people that I've come for, the people that are in need are all sinners. They just missed the point. Like, duh, healthy people don't need a doctor. Of course, Jesus was using his normal approach of extremes here. He does it all the time. Extreme saying to make a point. Of course, The healthy don't need a doctor. I mean, that's I didn't come for the righteous. Who's righteous? Well, it's really the people who think they are healthy that don't need God. While in fact, they are rotten from the inside out. And maybe that was us. Maybe that's your story. It's definitely my story. I mean, I thought I had some things figured out in life, and man, I didn't have a clue. It's not the righteous or perceived righteous person who Jesus calls. They don't need him and aren't seeking him in the least. Jesus came to call those who know that they fall short of perfection, who are aware of the problems from the inside out, the lack of holiness and problems caused by our own sin, and the problems that are thrown on us that we experience, the pain that we experience because of the sin of others. One of my professors said this, quote, "A person must acknowledge his or her need for Jesus and his righteousness before that one will benefit from the great physician's powers." We've got to see our own need first. So here to summarize, Levi gathered his friends by throwing a party. Jesus went to the party and was accused of hanging out with messy people. Regardless of where you live, there are likely very messy people in your neighborhood. You have messy neighbors. It might be obvious by the mess in their yard or the car that they're driving, but it may not be. That family whose yard looks perfect, whose car's always clean. You know that neighbor? Ooh. Like I intend for my car to always be clean, and then I go 6 months without washing it, and I'm like, oh, I got to wash my car. How do some people have cars that are clean all the time? Well, I'll tell you, if you have the means, you can pay somebody to come wash it. You don't even have to move it. Pull it out of the driveway. Someone comes, they wash it, it's clean every week. Some people do that every single week. Does that mean that their life is any cleaner than yours? Does that mean that they have anything more figured out than you? Maybe to make money, but no, their life is probably messy too. That neighbor that you think has it all figured out, maybe they don't. Jesus is calling us to embrace the messiness of relationships. Real relationships are always messy. Just think about your family. Is your family non-messy? I think of, is there anything that's not messy about my family? Is there anything that's not messy about having dinner? Like just having dinner. Like just getting 6 people around the table, getting dinner prepared, getting dinner ready, having a conversation around the table that is, noises that are coming from body parts and, things that are going on with kids and things that are getting flung and, things that are happening. It's just messy. One day in my house is pretty messy. How about yours? Like, how about when you go and hang out with extended family? Like, how awkward is that? How weird is that? Because it's just messy. The family members that you don't see for a while, it's just messy. Family life can be pretty messy. I met a guy last night at a wedding. I was at the Westin in Georgetown. Have you ever been there, Eric? It's my first time there. It's awesome. Awesome little courtyard. And the weather between today, I'm doing a wedding today. Heartbreaking. At Searsville Mansion, I know they wanted it to be outside. It is not going to be outside. But yesterday was just perfect. And so after the wedding, I'm always now, if at all possible, I wear a bow tie now. And so I don't wear straight ties anymore. But inspired by my son Elijah on his senior prom, full disclosure, I've been wanting to do bow ties, learn to do that myself. Anyway, I noticed this one guy wearing a bow. It was not a black tie affair, so there's just one guy, really sharp dressing look guy. He kind of looked like a statistics professor or something like that. I don't know. He looked really sharp. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. But anyway, looked really sharp. I caught him out of the corner of my eye. Afterwards, kind of standing around waiting to take a picture. And he's just standing there by himself. So I mosey my way over, and I'm like, hey, I like your bow tie. It's really awesome. I've kind of switched to bow ties myself. And we start talking about bow ties. Really nice purple bow tie. I'm like, man, that's my favorite color. Yeah, that's my favorite color too. We start talking. I'm like, so what's your relation to the couple here? And he's like, oh, my son grew up with the groom. Since childhood. Actually, they were born 1 month apart. So now I'm hooked. I'm like, that is amazing. But the messy part. So we start talking. I'm like, oh, so was your son one of the groomsmen? He had to be one of the groomsmen, right? Because if they grew up together from childhood, I'm sure he's like, no, he didn't make it. He said he didn't make it. He's working on the end of his PhD. So I'm like, some guys here can relate. So I'm like, oh, that makes sense. If he couldn't be here, he's like, oh no, he could have been here. He could have been here. He's not here. And he goes on to tell me the story. I'm like, man, life can be messy. Now, he was there because they're close friends. He and his wife are close friends with the couple. This guy and I was like, oh, well, are they still in touch? He's like, they're occasionally in touch, but, he's kind of doing his own thing or whatever. Oh, man, family can be messy. He said he doesn't even talk. He barely even talks to his son. He gets into the whole story. I'm just like, I didn't ask him, hey, I'm going to preach tomorrow. I'm going to use an illustration, but what a mess life can be sometimes. Now, I still don't know what neighbor owns the car. I told you about this neighbor a couple weeks ago. But after I preached about the car that had been stuck in front of my house going the opposite direction that looked like a mess, it moved. It moved. It was parked the opposite way in the wrong place. But as I walked by it yesterday, I did a long run yesterday. As I'm walking back, I'm kind of cooling down. I look over it and I notice the car is on the other side of the street, parked in the right direction, right in the right kind of parking spot. And I was like, oh, okay, Lord. Now, they are probably going through something difficult. I have no idea who owns the car. But my first thought was, man, whoever owns that car. I mean, it was sitting out front of my house for weeks and never moved. And now it just moved. It was on the other side of the street. Wow, I don't know. Lord, I don't know what they're going through, but it's probably difficult. Rather than complain about how bad the car looks, I am asking God to help me embrace whoever it is and help me overcome my fears and my bias toward them, and to show me what He would have me to do next. I hope and I pray that that person, that family, is able to come to one of our block parties this summer. And I'm going to talk about our family's commitment to do that next Sunday in our Neighborhood Commitment Sunday. It is important for us to be discerning and thoughtful about who we approach and how we do so. As I mentioned before, we don't want to take lightly the real, genuine threats that are out there. But following Jesus isn't the safe option in life anyway, nor is it supposed to be. Being Jesus costs Jesus his life. And actually, we talked about this weeks ago. Kind of costs us too, right? Jesus said, if any of you, whoever wants to follow after me, whoever wants to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, wherever I lead you and however I lead you. He promised that those who follow him will be persecuted for doing so. I don't know what that's going to look like in our life. I would imagine that sooner than later, I'm not going to be able to say some of the things that just are quoted in the Bible, not my own personal opinions. I mean, if I shared my own personal opinions on many things, we'd probably get shut down, but I'm not here to do that or convince anybody on some opinion I have on something. That doesn't matter. What does God say? And, in some places, and I think some places like where we live, I don't know what's going to happen. I certainly hope not. I hope we'll continue to have the freedom. I hope people will flock to the truth and recognize that the Bible does have answers, like what we're going to talk about on Mother's Day, for so many moms who deal with so much pain. But as the authors of the book conclude, quote, safety is a natural desire, but it can keep us from being like Jesus in the midst of an unsafe world. Wow. There are people who risk their lives all the time. Elizabeth risks her life every time she goes to work. Weston's going to risk his life when he goes out to serve our country. And it's the same, in many contexts, right? Eduardo risks his life, through his work. I mean, Eric and I risk our lives every time we stand up at a wedding. God only knows what crazy uncle's going to come after us. I object! I've only heard that once, and it was a joke, thankfully. So far, safe on that. But what we often label as fear is actually often timidity. And I want to close just with this thought. 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit of God, the Spirit that God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power. What is the kind of power that we need? I mean, Jeff and I have taken down a tree in his yard, and you need some power to do that. We were pulling out a bush that's not the kind of power here. The power is the kind of power that Paul prayed for in Ephesians chapter 3, that is the power to love. It takes a supernatural power, the power of the Holy Spirit, to love someone who hates us. And that's the kind of power, right? Love your enemies. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You probably got some neighbors that want to be your enemies, known or unknown. You may not know how much a neighbor doesn't like. I don't think I have neighbors that don't like me, but God only knows, probably. I'm sure there was some neighbor who, actually I've been cursing in my heart the last 48 hours or so when I've come home. 3 different cars parked in my spot. Can you imagine the nerve of some neighbor? Like it's clearly marked, at least it was at one point. You can kind of see white lettering, easy to miss. Rarely is someone parked there. 3 cars in a row, 2 nights in a row, I had to come home and not park in my own spot. Imagine the nerve. Somebody probably saw me pull up last night and just scowl, and my windows were up, thankfully, and I'm like, what? What are you doing? Like out loud in my car. I see this car. What are you doing parking in my spot? And, another spot open right there. It's no big deal. How many neighbors have seen neighbor Ed? Pastor Ed. My kids like to do that. I'll say something, and, Emmett will be like, hey, Pastor Ed, good job there. Way to go, Pastor Ed. Probably not alone. For the Spirit of God does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Lord, please help me to submit to your Spirit in my life. As we seek God and his heart for our neighborhood, may he empower us with love and self-discipline. So brothers and sisters, God is already working in our neighborhoods. And we believe that here. That's why our mission is we're joining God. God was already at work long before we were here. He's going to be here long after we're gone. And we are simply accepting his invitation to join him. He's already at work, been at work. He's already working. As the authors conclude, quote, being a good neighbor simply means slowing down and being aware of what he is doing. Be developing real relationships. You'll find out how God is already moving in a person's life. You'll begin to overcome the fear that you once had and develop trust for one another. So next Sunday, we're calling Commitment to Neighboring Sunday. First ever. Maybe first annual, I don't know, but first ever. Commitment to Neighboring Sunday. The message will be a little bit different. It'll be a little bit shorter. We're going to take communion together. We're going to have some extended worship. Elliot's been testing out some things. We got someone that's going to be a guest worship leader with him, along with Amir. So come early, come often, And we're going to have a great, great Sunday. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to solidify your commitment to neighboring. At least whatever next step God is leading you to write that down on your new Connect card, and just to say, hey, maybe what you're going to do is we're going to pray for XYZ neighbor. You don't have to tell me the details or anything like that. Maybe, hey, we're going to plan a group or family block party, or we're going to start doing a front yard fire pit. We're going to try, or maybe it's just we're going to continue to pray about what our family is going to do. I don't know, whatever it is. There's no pressure for you to do any particular thing, but I just want, maybe what you do is you accept Laura and I's invitation for all of you to come to our Memorial Day block party, or our 4th of July block party, or multiple Sunday night drinks and desserts that we're going to have, and I'll share a little bit more about that next Sunday as we solidify our commitment and look at the calendar, and we'll tell you. And maybe you're a little bit afraid, and you're like, well, I'm not Pastor Ed. I don't know how to do that. Hey, come see how we do it. And then you figure out how you can do it, and invite us, and we'll come. And then you can just invite your chatty pastor, to talk to your neighbors. And who knows? Maybe that's the next step. I don't know. I'd be happy to do that. But I want to encourage everyone to plan something and even consider either hosting or participating. As I just said, there's some great resources, actually. There's even a block party kit at artofneighboring.com. Great, just practical tools, practical advice. Memorial Day and 4th of July, as I already mentioned, are great opportunities, and they're coming up. Great opportunities. Awesome firework display right near our house in walking distance. So you could come to our 4th of July block party and then walk with us to set fireworks off. No, I mean to watch fireworks, and then maybe on the way back we'll set some off. Don't tell them. Ooh, that's on video. So we may or may not see other people lighting fireworks off. Okay, I don't know. Next Sunday, as I mentioned, I'm going to ask you to make a commitment. So join me again this week in this series to pray the simple prayers. We wrap it up next Sunday. God, what would you have me to do in my neighborhood? Imagine the impact we can make in this community just by authentically loving our literal neighbors. That's what this series is all about. Really, that's what we're all about, the mission of Jesus to love people as he has loved us. Let's close with prayer, and then we're going to sing and just make a big deal of Jesus as we close the service this morning.